Your Majesty the Queen, the rebels have broken through the Red Leaf Fort, and it's only 2 days away from the capital. The disorganized knight stood up and said with fear to the woman behind the table, "My subordinate thinks that you should immediately persuade your Majesty to leave the capital with you temporarily. The rebels have more than 10,000 farmers and knives at the front of the light infantry with mixed shields and more than 800 half-armored light knights. There are less than 1,000 defenders of the royal capital. I see, you go down." The woman rubbed her eyes wearily, and William, who was standing behind her, looked up. A pair of dark circles were hanging under the eyes that looked forward to life, which made her beautiful face pale. "Your Majesty! The subordinates are not timid, but the army left behind in the capital has been trained for a long time, and they can fight against the serfs with pitchforks, but the rebels still have a considerable number of knights. If they do not leave the capital, if so, it's really difficult for you and His Majesty the King. I will consider your suggestion. Go to my female officer now and ask her to send a letter to Duke Cole for me, asking where the Grand Duke's troops have gone." "Your Majesty! You can't count on that old fox Cole, he just—" "All right." The woman stretched out her hand and pressed the pressure to signal the knight to stop, and a pair of charming peach blossom eyes stared at him with dignity. After staring at him, the woman said angrily, "The guards of the royal capital say there are 1,000 soldiers, but in fact there are not necessarily 800. I don't expect Duke Cole's reinforcements, do I expect you guys? Do people sacrifice their lives for me?" Looking at the knight who was kneeling on one knee and said nothing, the woman waved her hand helplessly. "Forget it, it's not your fault, let's go down and deliver the letter." After the knight fled out of the palace gate, the woman leaned back on the chair feebly, rubbed her temples tiredly, and sighed softly. "William, do you also think I should run away with His Majesty?" Her voice was as subtle as a murmur, but William, who was standing behind him with a big sword, could still hear it clearly. He shook his head vigorously, the lining of the helmet knocked against the collar of the armor, making an unpleasant scratching sound. "Your Majesty, I am just a bodyguard. My duty is to protect your safety, and I am not qualified to express my opinion on the emergency military situation." "Ha." The woman smiled helplessly, with a look of lingering anger on her face. "You are not qualified to follow me everywhere to suppress the rebellion for the past 2 years, aren't those idiots even less qualified? Last year I reminded those 2 idiots that their territory could no longer be tossed, and that Aiden, in order to renovate the Duke's mansion, unexpectedly he made a boiler tax. Anyone who boils a pot and cooks will have to pay him a tax, not to mention the rebels, even I want to kill him. Cain is even more extreme. He is simply a goblin who walks upright. Although he has not developed any new tax, he has received the tax on the territory for 30 years. And there is still the face to ask me for military money every year? I can't wait to kill these right now." The more the woman spoke, the more excited she became. Her chest kept heaving and heaving with anger, and her fair right hand slammed the table, causing the pen and paper on it to fall to the ground. William withdrew his gaze from the magnificent place, looked at his nose and heart. He stood behind the woman with a big sword and said nothing. He was honestly a trashcan of negative emotions, and Chuan thought he was a mute. After the woman vented for a while, she slumped on the chair weakly, and said tiredly, "I have been wrangling with these for the past few days, and I haven't even slept much. William, you go and call Emily and ask her to help me. Rub your head. Your Majesty the Queen, Emily is dead. She blocked the cold arrows of the rebel sharpshooter for you." The woman was stunned for a while, and then she murmured somewhat decadently, "Yes, Emily is dead, and she blocked the arrow for me. Then come and rub my head for me." Facing the woman's request, William was stunned for a moment, then released the big sword in his hand and took a step forward, gently rubbing the woman's temple with his big armored hand. The woman made a lazy voice. The soft body stretched slightly, closed the charming peach blossom eyes, and slowly leaned on the back of the chair. After a while, Her beautiful brows wrinkled, and she said with some dissatisfaction, "I took off my hand armor, and the nail pieces are all hanging in my hair." William nodded, took off the gauntlet and hung it on the silk sash behind his waist, then stretched out a big hand full of calluses and gently stroked the woman's temple. The rough finger pulp slid across the temporalis muscle, lightly pressed Anmian point, rubbed Baihui point, rubbed Fengqi point, and finally rubbed both palms and applied heat on both sides of her cold and tender chin for a while. "Did Emily teach you this technique?" "Well, it's so comfortable." William shook his head lightly where she couldn't see it, and said, "No, this is actually what I taught myself in the barber shop. The little girl who cut my hair gave me a set of things like this, and successfully fooled me into doing it. The $2,000 hair clips, I shaved for more than 2 years, didn't spend it until I wore them." The feminine woman sat upright, twisted her stiff neck, then tilted her head back and slowly leaned against William's armor. She murmured, "You know, those two idiots don't have the ability to be dukes at all, and their subjects are already struggling to survive every day, otherwise they wouldn't be coerced into rebelling against His Majesty the King. That's all I have to say. To send troops to kill them, I feel like the villainous queen in those night novels." "You said, did I do something wrong?" William didn't say a word, and concentrated on being his own shampoo boy. Rub, massage, massage, hold, pinch, pat, knock, fingers, palms, wrists, fists, joints, joints, abdomen, first lift and then peck, 9 heavy and 1 light, try to brush the proficiency of massage skills on a woman's beautiful head and neck degrees, as if one after another +1, +1, +1. Don't you want to ignore me?" The woman smiled self-deprecatingly. "Yet, you and Emily have such a good relationship, she even taught you how to eat. Seeing that she always haunts you, I know she must have a crush on you. Now she's defending my arrow and dying, you will follow me to the battlefield when you are not an adult, I am sorry for you." "Your Majesty the Queen is serious," William said lightly. "Emily has always regarded you as her sister, and it is her own choice to shield you from arrows. As for the fight against the rebels, I don't know if you did the right thing. But I know that those new nobles who are coercing the people will never be able to bring them peace." William only felt the Queen's soft neck stiffen, and then a small cold hand reached over and firmly grasped his big hand. "Thank you, William." The woman stood up slowly, turned her head and stared at his indifferent face with emotion, and patted the back of his hand lightly. "That's what I thought too, and I persisted. Although the people of Aden and Cain are innocent, why are those whose homes were destroyed by the rebels? I am not qualified to forgive those rebels for them. All I can do is do what a queen should do and bring peace to my people." William looked at the woman in front of him without saying a word. She was about 27 or 18 years old. She had a slender figure and a very beautiful appearance. Her long wavy brown hair fell on her chest. The mature charm, the whole person is like a ripe peach, but there are a pair of peach blossom eyes on her face, which makes her face quite charming and charming. But now, the light in her eyes overshadowed her natural seductive temperament, making her whole person a little different. William was very familiar with this kind of look. Back then, an old professor who was about to retire from college had this kind of light in his eyes when he looked at his students. It is something that can only be possessed after having a firm heart, pure faith, clarifying the meaning of one's own existence, and finding the goal of lifelong struggle. It is the unique light of idealists. The woman in front of her eyes flashes an inexplicable light. William smacked his lips. "Why are you here again?" "That is to put all the light on for the dream and the beauty in your heart. This inexplicable temperament makes you upset, angry, and angry. I am indeed a little distracted, and not only that, but also a little bloody. As for what's burning in anger? 8 lines, 8 lines, you are a plugin and you have the final say." Looking at this innocent, pathetic, but shining stupid woman in front of you, as a careerist, your face is silent, but your heart is like a hurricane passing through waves, and you are screaming and cursing in your heart, roaring. How can there be such a stupid person in the world? You were completely irritated by the brilliance in her eyes. This stupid woman was born with the rights and status you seek, but she doesn't need to give up weakness and kindness like you do. Why is she so lucky? Why should she have the glow of humanity you have lost? In this world where the strong eat the weak, innocence and kindness are the greatest sins. There is a nameless fire in your heart. Although this stupid woman is talented, she doesn't understand human nature at all. The people she was trying to save didn't need her good intentions at all, as long as they could live, even if she was torn to shreds. Hey, how can my inner drama be so rich? Besides, don't you really feel embarrassed about this second reading of the middle school? You narrowed your eyes slightly, and secretly made up your mind to tear up everything she cherishes with your own hands. Trample the rules she abides by. Kill her beloved lover. Destroy the army she relies on for the Great Wall. Destroy the homeland she regards as life. Let her realize that the truth of this world is eternal darkness, the truth of this reality is endless blood dripping. The system of the island country long Aotian No. 2 middle school finally ended the inflammation of the second middle school, and he generously issued a series of tasks. A Ruthless Hero Mission 1, Destroy the Royal Capital Knights or break up their establishment 625/1000 Mission 2, Kill Peter King of France 0/1 Mission 3, Completely destroy Flange, or let the 7 Grand Duchies of Flange no longer recognize the status of the royal family of Flange 5/7. William smacked his lips a little dejectedly, not to mention the sleazy operation of only talking about tasks and not rewards. Just your few tasks are so outrageous, I think it's almost as if I don't need to take action. The knights of the royal capital had already eaten more than 200 people's salaries, and the rebels were about to come. So many people escaped in the past 2 days. What? It's 621/1000 now, and I've run 4 more in a while, maybe there's no one in 2 days. As for letting the 7 duchies no longer recognize the status of the royal family, this is even more simple. After 3 days, the royal family of France will be wiped out. It would be good if those scheming dukes don't fall into the trap. Who cares about the status of the royal family at that time? Killing Peter is a bit difficult, according to the memories of playing the Battle of Flange in a previous life. In the cutscene CG, this guy tried to abandon the city and escape before the city was broken. Then he ran away and disappeared. That's right, this world originated from a strategy war chess game of William's previous life. Flange was the map of one of the battles. However, the 2 sides William operated at that time were not the rebels and Flange. The 2 sides of the battle were the vengeful banshees. The undead army under Avril Lavigne, and the human army that controls the kingdom of Farland. The woman named Avril looked at William with relief, but found that her cold-tempered bodyguard seemed to be in a trance, staring at her in a daze. Looking through the visor on the helmet, his eyes seemed a little scattered, as if he was not only looking at himself, but at something farther away. "William, what's wrong with you?" She took off William's helmet curiously, revealing the still somewhat immature face below. William, who was harassed by the system, was staring blankly at the subtitles in front of him. After the helmet was taken off, his scattered eyes suddenly became focused, and he looked straight at the woman's charming face. His eyes changed from scattered to firm, from dazed to firm, but it was only a slight change in his eyes, but the ignorant and youthful temperament on his face had faded for the most part, as if he had suddenly changed from an ignorant teenager to a mature and determined man. Looking at this handsome yet somewhat immature face, Avril was shocked. William has been his bodyguard for almost 2 years, so he should be 16 this year. In the past 2 years, he has grown so fast that he even changed his armor twice, but he is used to standing behind Avril, and he has a cold temperament and doesn't talk much, so his presence is actually not strong. But I don't know why, Avril always felt that William gave her a reliable and friendly feeling, and usually liked to talk to this little guy who didn't talk much. Although she knew that William was 16 years old, she seldom treated him as an adult. In her mind, William was still the child who wielded a club at her. "You've grown up, William." There was a hint of emotion in Avril's eyes. When she ordered the banning of the title of the Vankins family, the child of the Vankins family who was holding a stick and wanted to hit her with a sap, has now become her own bodyguard, even more so from a face. The indifferent young man has become a young man with a stable temperament, and she felt a little sighed. The Queen's gaze swept across William's handsome face with some relief, and she couldn't help but pause for a few seconds as she swept across the soared eyebrows that flew into her temples and the thin lips that fit together. She smiled with some nostalgia, but did not expect that the delicate and fierce child at the time was now a beautiful man, but his temperament was still too cold, and he always had this expression on his face, and he never refused to smile. If William knew what she was thinking, there would definitely be more than a dozen locomotive grooves to vomit. The first mission released by the sand sculpture system that year was called Road to Power, which required him to become the heir of the Vankins family as a concubine. William was overjoyed when he received the assignment, and he was preparing for a big fight. As a result, the Vankins family was copied by the Queen the next day, and the mission failed before it even started. The sand sculpture system gave William a mediocre person evaluation, and then gave him a punishment called Ambitioner's Face. The effect was nothing else, but it was a profoundly urban face unique to the careerist. In other words, it is the paralyzed face exclusive to the domineering president. The second mission of the secondary system is also related to Avril. First, BB explained how much William suffered after his house was raided, and then released the second mission to him: Assassination of the Queen to the Queen. Assassination Operation 0/1. After hesitating for a while, William decided to give it a try. Anyway, he only asked to initiate action, but he did not ask for certain success. And according to his memory, this queen is a rare Notre Dame, so she shouldn't kill children, right? After all, if you don't complete the task again, what if you are given a 9,000-year-old physique? Unfortunately, the mission failed in the end. William just went around with a stick, and before he could start, he was directly pushed to the ground by two guards weighing 200 pounds, and his tailbone was almost broken. This failed assassination allowed him to successfully obtain the evaluation Assassin's Shame from the system, and was punished Assassin's Appearance. The effect was to lower everyone's vigilance against him, and Avril was very open to him. It is because of this ability. Reading www.uugonshu.com. And Avril Lavigne of Notre Dame did as he thought, not only did not blame him for the assassination, but instead arranged him in her own guard, and even delivered a speech full of second grade on the spot. "I banned the Vankins family not because of personal grudges, but because your actions have hurt Barabella. Little guy, you can come and be my escort, see with your own eyes what I have done, and see what I can bring to this decaying kingdom. If you still feel that I am wrong at that time and want to assassinate me, then I will give you a chance to Barbara." After the speech, William was carried away by the Queen's guards, and then he practiced 3.5 in winter and 3 fu in summer. After being diligently practiced by a group of burly men, he successfully obtained his basic occupation. Guardian LV1 Physical +2, Strength +1 per level. Special skill, Iron Wall, slightly increases the block success rate. Special skill, Tenacity, triggered when fatally damaged, forcibly retains 1 HP. Combat skill, Cover, block a fatal attack for the friendly target, and deduct double the HP of the attack. When this profession awakened, William's mentality exploded. In the game of the previous life, the guard and the dancer were called two tool people, and they could go all the way from the early stage to the later stage. However, this does not mean that this profession is very strong. The tool man has already explained the role of guards blocking the sword. And because of the toughness of the stunt, if you don't get killed by the opportunity after blocking once, you can block the second time when the cover skill is reset. An extreme flow player like William can use more than 10 guards in a single battle. His game history is the history of blood and tears of the guards. The swords he has blocked can circle the earth 7 times. Who doesn't want to play? Be a mage, draw a dragon with a flick of your left hand, and throw a thunderbolt with a swipe of your right hand. Do you know how handsome you are when you use skills with special effects? As for the guards, is it a special effect to be covered in blood when blocking the sword for someone? William, whose dream of being a mage was shattered, became a palace guard in dejection, and was specially responsible for watching the gate to His Majesty the King. But don't mention it, the treatment of the palace guards is quite good. Not only is the salary generous, but they actually stand on guard in shifts for one day off. When they are not working, they listen to opera and dance. It is not too comfortable. During that time, William, who had money and leisure, lived quite well. It's a pity that happy days are always short, and the happy life of salted fish only lasted for less than half a year before the war broke out. After the two battles, the Queen's bodyguards suffered heavy casualties. In the case of shortage of manpower, he was transferred to the guard at the gate of the palace, and his happy career of fishing, paddling, listening to songs and watching big white legs at get off work was gone forever. Guards have been doing this job for 2 years. Although Fran does not fight every day, rebellions big and small are always unstoppable, and there are naturally many dangers. William's tenacity skills have been played once. After several near deaths, the guard profession has been upgraded to LV9, almost full, and the Queen barely suppressed the rebellion. She thought everything would be over, but at this time, the biggest mine exploded. Come! After all, land is limited. Once it is granted to one family, it cannot be granted to another. The fiefs obtained by the new aristocrats are far less extensive than those of the old nobility. Grade. The wealth and silk are touching. Although the new nobles are dissatisfied, how can the meat in the mouths of the old nobles be spit out? The contradiction between the two is becoming more and more intense. It just so happened that Duke Aidan's territory ushered in a sudden drought, and the forced residents who could not survive, instigated by some grassroots nobles, broke out an unprecedented rebellion. With the support of the new nobles he rushed into Aidan's ducal mansion and pushed the greedy ruler to the execution stand. Not only that, the turmoil quickly spread to the Duchy of Caen, which was in a similar situation next door. After reluctantly organizing several disfigured suppressions, the Archduke Cain was also driven out of the duchy, and fled with a small number of troops. King's capital. At this time, the northern part of the French Empire was resisting the barbarian invasion, and the southern part had some friction with the Holy Empire. Most of the elite troops were involved, and these emerging nobles simply did nothing to stop them, and they started to march towards the capital with a large number of ordinary people. Frank's army is all in the hands of the major dukes. Except for the two stupid dukes, the Great Justice and the barbarians in the northernmost territory are fighting to the death. The closest Grand Duke Cole has been dragging the foreign workers, and the remaining two dukes are also unable to work, or even simply do not want to save. The French Empire is about to collapse. Let William see, it's really time to run away. Although the Queen is already mobilizing the defenders in the southern border to retreat, it is obviously too late. She is blocking everything and wants to defend the capital. The Lannes royal family left the last trace of dignity. Avril didn't know that her bodyguard had just accepted 3 maddening missions. Instead, she stretched out her hand to pinch William's face, and looked at him with a bit of amusement as he frowned and avoided. "You little guy, you had a cold face when you were less than my chest back then, and now you are a head taller than me. How come you still look so bitter and hateful?" William raised his head to avoid her non-stop hand, his 2 sharp brows wrinkled slightly, and said with a slight dissatisfaction, "Your Majesty the Queen, you need to maintain the demeanor of a noble, and I'm an adult, please don't do this." An overly intimate gesture. Avril smiled and grabbed the collar of his armor, stretched out her hand and pinched William's pretending to be serious face. "What kind of adult are you? You are more than 10 years younger than me. In my eyes, you are still the stinky little devil." As if temporarily forgetting the coming rebels, Avril squinted a pair of peach blossom eyes and rubbed William's face happily, like a child who had found a favorite toy. Usually William has always been unsmiling because of the existence of the face of a careerist. His whole face has maintained a flat and serious expression all year round, and it is rare to show such a helpless emotion. This huge contrast obviously stimulated Avril, and the more embarrassed William's expression became, the more excited she became. However, her height was much shorter than William's. When William raised his head, she couldn't pinch William's face. In order to be able to play for a while, Avril stood on tiptoe with great interest, and even stretched out her white lotus arms to wrap around William's neck, trying to pull back that handsome face that was somewhat flushed. "Your Majesty, the message from Archduke Cole is here." The side door behind William was suddenly pushed open, and a female officer hurried in with a tray in hand, but she immediately froze in place, her delicate face pale. From the female official's point of view, Her Majesty the Queen, who has always been dignified, was lying in the arms of the tall guard, her curvaceous body lying soft and boneless on the armor on his chest. A jade arm was gently wrapping the guard's neck, while the other hand caressed his face. Her Majesty's charming face was smiling like a flower, with a slight flush on her face, a pair of peach blossom eyes that were so sweet that they were dripping with water, and her blushing and plump lips were even slightly raised, like asking for a kiss. The female official's heart was like a flash of thunder. Have. J. Q. Then came another thunderbolt. I. Cold. She stood there with her mouth open, like a duck that had been exposed to 100,000 volts. She stood at the door in a daze, neither daring to shout or run, her legs trembling under her long skirt. I was afraid that the guard would pull out a big sword and cut him hidden in the next second. Avril discovered the existence of the female official, and noticed that her behavior was somewhat indecent, so she shyly retracted the arm that was wrapping William, and the right hand that was pinching his cheek also pretended to make two gestures in his ear, as if picking something same thing. She straightened up, pretended to be calm, cleared her throat, and asked with a blushing face, "Mia, is there any news from Archduke Cole?" Avril couldn't help being a little embarrassed when someone saw her little girl's attitude, and began to reflect in her heart, whether her nerves were too tense recently, which caused her to be a little too intimate when only William was present. The next time I approached William, it seemed like I had unloaded my burden, and I always let go of it abnormally. The female officer raised her head tremblingly, the corner of her eyes swept William's face quietly, and her heart suddenly shuddered, as if someone had poured a basin of ice water on her head, and it was cold from the top of her head to the soles of her feet. The tall and handsome guard looked extremely cold and solemn, and stared at her with extremely cold eyes, as if there was no emotion at all, as if he was looking at a dead man. Noticing the female official's gaze, William, who was caught sparring with his boss during office hours, was a little embarrassed. He forced a reluctant smile on his professional face and nodded at her. William's unsmiling response almost scared the female officer into urinating. She lowered her head with her legs in battle, reading www. Yukanshu. Com pursed his lips and couldn't say a word, his mind was full of that cold and ruthless, to please, smile. She never imagined that she would feel so afraid of the slight muscle movement on the corners of other people's mouths, and the glacial thawing smile on her handsome and indifferent face was so charming, but the deep indifference, embarrassment, in those eyes so cold again. "Mia." Avril, who had not received a response for a long time, asked with some doubts, "Why don't you speak? What news did Grand Duke Cole pass on?" K.O. Cole. The female officer tried to open her mouth to report the news, but when she raised her head to meet William's gaze, her upper and lower teeth immediately began to fight, her mind was full of William's face, and those eyes full of murderous intent, pretending to be calm, seemed like a man strangling her neck. The cold big hands made her stumbling and could not speak. Seeing her reaction, Avril smiled suddenly, and patted William on the shoulder dotingly as if her sister was treating her younger brother, and explained, "It's okay, William is my bodyguard, there is nothing to avoid." What she means is that the news of Archduke Cole can directly say that William is a trustworthy person, and there is no need to worry that he will reveal the military information. However, this sentence fell into the ears of the female official, but it was like a typhoon passing by. No. You don't need to be shy. Well, William has been here, as a bodyguard, for 2 years, and he used to be a member of His Majesty the King, the Palace Guard, so he doesn't need to keep it secret. Looking at Her Majesty the Queen's magnanimous face, Mia felt as if her head had been struck by lightning, and her brain was boiling. This guard, and the Queen, 2 years? And before, the King. Are you nobles, so exciting? The female official seemed to have opened the door to a new world, and refreshed the bottom line of the nobles' ethics in their cognition. Even peeking at William's eyes was wrong, and his eyes were always looking behind him. She handed the tray in her hand tremblingly. After Avril took the letter in the tray, she seemed to be hiding something dirty, and she seemed to have to leave the house. Closed the door. Avril patted her cheek lightly, calming down the blood that had surged up because of the fight, and then slowly opened the letterhead in her hand, and then the flushed flush that had just calmed down came to her face again. 5 more days. After 5 days, he can come and collect my corpse. She blushed with anger at the contents of the letter. She tried to shred the letter with both hands, but she did not expect that the letter used for the communication was made of a special material, which was tougher than the old tree bark. Tug. Cough. Cough. She suddenly threw down the letterhead, stretched out her hand to cover her lips and coughed, and an abnormal blush appeared on her fair face. Without a word, William picked up the dropped letter and glanced at it quickly. Your Majesty, the private army of the fierce lion family has already made every effort to advance to the capital, but the food, grass, and supplies have not yet been gathered, and it will take 5 days to reach the capital. I hope Your Majesty and the Queen will persist for a few days. When the vanguard arrives, Old Cole will surely. I personally killed the leader of the rebel army to the 2. A bunch of idiots. Do you really think those rebels will be satisfied with occupying 2 duchies? Sooner or later, this self-righteous old fellow will be, cough cough cough. Your Majesty, it's time for you to see a doctor, because you haven't rested for a long time with the rebels. If you go on like this, you won't be able to hold on. William X's indifferent voice sounded faintly, pulling Avril out of her anger for a short time. She slumped weakly on the chair, and laughed twice. Cough, there's no need for this anymore. The rebels will call after 2 days. Now I can't hold back at most a serious illness. Wouldn't it be the same death after 2 days? William closed his eyes and pondered deeply while leaning on the big sword. He opened the mouth and said, Have you ever thought about? Avril waved her hand and said helplessly, Have you ever thought about leaving the capital? The army that can be dispatched is either in the north or in the hands of Marquis Jibo in the south. Those troops are all private armies of the major nobles, if the capital is the capital. After being beaten down, how many people do you think are still willing to obey the dispatch of the royal family? Gilbert still has a week to arrive. If Cole can resist for a few days, the rebellion may still be suppressed. Now he obviously won't come. Fran has come to an end. After she coughed twice, she fell on the table angrily and helplessly. I asked him to restrain his taxes and revise the laws that were too unreasonable. Did Cole choose to die for Fran? And those new nobles, I'm already planning to help them obtain reasonable fiefs as much as possible. Why can't I wait? But I have to start a war. Her Majesty the Queen, who is shrewd, strong, and imposing in front of people, shows a rare vulnerable side. She murmured, Should I really not do this, and should watch Flange slowly collapse? But if these nobles are no longer restrained, how will the commoners survive? William stood silently behind her, took off the cloak behind him and put it on her. In fact, what you have done is not bad. You have done a decent job in formulating laws, commanding the army, handling government affairs, and approving taxes. If you change to the world in your previous life, you might really be able to continue the national fortune for hundreds of years. However, there are extraordinary people in this world. A team of hundreds of elite knights is enough to easily defeat tens of thousands of ordinary people. The greatest armed force is in the hands of the nobles. If it weren't for the intervention of the new nobles, those ordinary people would not be able to overthrow the two dukes in a few hundred years. In such a world, it is very difficult for a king who is dedicated to taking care of the people at the bottom to end well. Avril closed the cloak on her body, and muttered on the table in anguish, "William, you are also from a noble family. After the Vankins family was banned, you have been serving as the guard of the royal family. It is difficult to understand the feelings of ordinary people. I was just like you before. Even before I was 18, I didn't know there were beggars in this world until the day I married Peter." She sat up straight, wrapped the cloak tightly around her body, and recalled in a trance, "At that time, people all over the street were cheering for us, throwing petals at us, everyone was bright and beautiful, everyone looked like so happy. But as we passed the 12th block, a dried flower was thrown on me." When William heard this, he immediately understood. The intersection of the main road of the capital and the 12th block was the entrance to the slum. Avril said in a low voice, "It was a flower thrown by a dirty little girl. She stood outside the alley on the street and smiled at me. I still remember that little grey face, the pair above. The big eyes are especially beautiful, like two black pearls embedded in the face. I also smiled at her at the time, then took a handkerchief and threw it back, with 2 pieces of candy and a few flower petals in it. Then a woman in tattered clothes ran out of the alley and gave the child to I hugged her back. She glanced at me when she got into the alley, her eyes were very complicated, and it was full of things I had never seen before. So I restrained my horse and took a step towards the alley, and looked inside. The scene in front of me just stunned me. There were dozens of people crowded in the alley that was more than 2 meters wide and 10 meters long. When they looked up at me together, those eyes were full of fear, as if I not one person, but a monster that wants to eat them. William stood behind her without saying a word, silently listening to her talk. I was quickly pulled back by Peter, and I was afraid to ask him who those people were. Peter told me with disgust on his face that they were all pariahs. For our wedding, he ordered them to be driven out 2 days ago. In the alley in the corner, so as not to affect my mood. Avril lowered her head, and the hair on her forehead fell, covering her charming face, and she couldn't see her expression at all. "You know, those people at that time have been in that dark alley full of feces for 2 days, 2 whole days. I was in a daze throughout the whole wedding, I didn't know what I was doing. My mind was full of the little girl's face and the fearful eyes of those people. After the wedding, I sent someone to look for the child, but the guard who came back told me that the child was dead. Those people in the alley of Uyuganshu www.uyuganshu.com fought to grab the 2 pieces of candy I threw. Being trampled to death by those who were fighting for the candy, 2 pieces of candy. Can you think of it? Just because of 2 candies." Avril covered her face and started sobbing, her ruddy fingers were too hard and began to faintly turn white. William sighed and didn't know what to say. Although candy was not a luxury item among the nobles, only an alchemist could make it. 2 pieces of candy cost about 1 silver whaler, enough for a dozen bags of grain in the hands of the poor. When I left Peter and rushed over, there was no one else in the alley, only the woman was still leaning in the deepest corner, with bruises on her face and blood oozing from the corners of her mouth. Full of footprints. After seeing me go over, she hugged her daughter's body and knelt down slowly, then looked up at me numbly, and I will never forget that look in my life. There is neither resentment nor anger, not even sadness, there is nothing in those eyes. The owner of those eyes is still alive, but the eyes seem to be dead. Listening to Avril's sobbing remarks, William couldn't say any words of comfort, so he had to stand silently behind her and accompany her. So I actually understand it. I know that the capital can no longer be kept. But if the royal family is driven away like this, everything I've done over the years will return to the way it was. The royal family has enough money for me and Peter to buy a big estate in another country, and we'll be fine, but those who have just seen hope will fall back into again, and the empty 12th block will come back again. People who cannot afford to pay taxes. I know I shouldn't pin my hopes on that old fox, I just don't want to see those eyes again. There was a long silence in the room, and William didn't know what to say. After the two were silent for a while, Avril wiped the tears on her face, took off her cloak and gave it to William. William, leave the capital. I'm going to arrange for Peter to leave. If the Queen wasn't me, maybe he would still be his king. Speaking of which, I'm still your enemy. If I hadn't banned the title of the Vankins family, you could have continued to be a noble and lived your life carefree. She stood on tiptoe and patted William on the shoulder, then opened the door a little lonely and walked out. At this moment, the familiar warmth came, the white cloak was draped over her shoulders again, and two large hands with gauntlets passed around, tying the cloak firmly around her white neck. Kook squeak! Kook squeak! The friction between the helmet and the shoulder armor sounded as usual. William carried the big sword and followed behind her without saying a word. Wherever she went, the unpleasant friction sounded behind her. Avril quietly wiped the snot from her face with her sleeves, her eyebrows raised lightly and her peach eyes rose, revealing a smile that didn't match her charming face. It's really ugly, why are you still wearing this armor? It's round and grey, and it doesn't look good at all, and it's not the same set as the helmet. It makes a lot of noise when you walk. What about the standard armor that the palace gave you? You sell it. William Chuan even twisted her neck when she was farting, making the armor squeak even louder. You know an egg. The standard armor issued by the palace to the guards only adds 4 points of armor, and the joints are handled very generally, but it will be a little more agile when worn. And this pair of armor not only lacks agility, but also has an armor value of 5 points. It looks like a masterpiece at first glance. What are you afraid of when it is old and ugly? Too lazy to pay attention to this incompetent woman, William put the sharp +3 armor-piercing +3 great sword against his shoulder, stretched out his hand to straighten the precision +1 helmet, and followed behind Avril to the king's bedroom. As soon as the two of them walked to the door of the bedroom, they heard the king's angry scolding coming from inside. Idiot! It's silk that came across the 7 seas from the east. How can you use it to wrap silverware? The corner of this thing is much more expensive than those broken forks. If you poke a hole, you're dead. Put it down. What about my grandfather's portrait? So what's the big one? You can fit more than a dozen paintings by famous artists in the spare space. Wait, let's take it off, just to wrap those silver forks. Idiot! Don't you understand? What is valuable is what is expensive, not what is important. Do you understand silk, magic stones, ancient books, and famous paintings? What you can't see, this broken armor, don't you know how much it weighs? How many things can the whole horse carry with this broken armor? Avril pushed open the door with a livid face and walked in, only to see that the originally splendid palace had been demolished in pieces, and several palace servants were even lying on the shelves and picking out the gold ornaments embedded in the corners of the walls. Peter! What are you doing? The man who was directing the demolition of the people in the palace looked over, his face full of resentment and anger. What else can I do? Those filthy pariahs are about to come over. Of course I'm going to run away. Is it possible to stay here with you and wait to die? Avril shivered with anger, her pink fists clenched, and finally let go weakly. Forget it, I really owe him what I owe, and I really haven't fulfilled my responsibilities as a queen all these years. Just run if you want. Seeing that his queen didn't say a word, she just looked at him in shock and helplessness, and there was even a trace of pity in her eyes. This look was exactly the same as the look at the wedding that year, as if he was not looking at his husband, but at a walking corpse whose body was manipulated by desire. A nameless fire suddenly ignited in Peter's heart. Damn it, Don't look at me with those condescending eyes, what are you? He angrily threw the helmet in his hand, but was caught by William behind Avril. Helm of the Silver Knight, armor plus 5 combat skill, Silver Phantom, which greatly increases the movement speed of the mount and itself within 1 minute, and can be activated once per hour. Note, the duration is doubled for each Silver Knight suit obtained. Current set collection progress 1/5. This is the helmet of the founding monarch of Flange. It was jointly created by several dwarf masters and enchanted by the goblin priests of the Whispering Forest. It is extremely valuable. However, due to some unknown reasons, the wearer needs to make a mental check. Failing the check will temporarily fall into a panic state. Damn it. Good stuff. This one is stronger than mine, and it also has active skills. If you can collect 5 of them, you can activate 16 minutes of active skills every hour, which is enough time for a good horse to run 10 times more kilometers, not to mention the extra acceleration. William silently hung the simple-looking helmet on his waist, and silently lowered it. The king over there was still venting his anger. If you didn't have to do those superfluous things, how dare these pariahs rebel against me? He roared at Avril with a blushing neck and a thick neck, and then threw another arm guard. William's eyes lit up, and he firmly grasped the armor in his hand. It was a left arm armor, and the armor value was only added by 2 points. However, one arm armor doesn't seem to count. It seems that it takes a pair to activate the skill, and the breast armor and leg armor should be added more than the arm armor. It seems that this equipment can give at least 20 armor points, which is superb. William's eyes on the king suddenly became extremely longing. Throw another one. Throw another one. Avril didn't know the idea that her bodyguard was wearing the ancestral armor of the French royal family. She just looked at the gaff Peter with great disappointment. The root cause of this rebellion was actually the conflict between the old and the new nobles, but when she looked at her husband who was venting her fears, she couldn't even think of an explanation. She just sighed and turned to leave. It's all you. It's all you. After contributing 2 more leg armors, she seemed to be completely infuriated by Avril's disappointed and contemptuous eyes, and in Avril's surprised and sad eyes, she pulled out her short dagger and stabbed it. William, who knew the plot, had been guarding him for a long time. He didn't even need to use his cover tactics. He just raised his hand and caught the soft assassination. The guard is advanced, the current level is LV10, and can be transferred. Oh roar, after more than 2 years, I finally reached the full level. A smile appeared on William's icy face, and then he snapped Peter's wrist fiercely. Yuyugonshu.com snatched the dagger from his cries of pain. Sharpness plus 1G, garbage. This is a dagger inlaid with gems. Although the craftsmanship is not high, the gems inlaid on it are very expensive, enough to buy a manor with an area of more than 100 acres. William decisively hung the dagger on his waist. Oh, by the way, I seem to have a task to do. William's eyes narrowed, and the great sword on his shoulders turned into a black shadow, and he slashed Hedon in the terrified eyes of His Majesty the King. Don't! William! Avril screamed from behind, and there was a slight pulling sensation behind the armor. I knew that this broken mission would definitely not be completed again. Forget it, he didn't die in history anyway, so I'll talk about it at another opportunity later. William curled his lips in annoyance, withdrew his sword according to his words, and then walked out of the bedroom 3 times after Avril's pull. Seeing the two disappear at the door of the bedroom, Peter, who was collapsed on the ground, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He was about to stand up tremblingly when he heard a harsh sound of armor rubbing. He looked up and saw that the evil star in ugly armor appeared at the door again, rushing towards him like a bull amidst the screams of the queen. Ah! 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 After Peter shouted twice, the panicked shouts stopped abruptly. I saw that William didn't attack the king after rushing over. He just took away the jeweled belt on his body, and then tied the scattered armor on the ground with the belt, and carried Shiran on his back and walked out of the bedroom. The people in the bedroom all looked at Peter, who was paralyzed on the ground, with strange expressions. On the gorgeous and luxurious carpet under His Majesty's feet, a wet trace could be seen. Avril outside the palace looked at William angrily and amusedly. At this time, he was seriously wiping the armor he just grabbed. William wiped it very carefully, even the inconspicuous dust would be wiped away. He even carefully stroked the potholes on the armor with his fingertips, as if he could smooth out the marks on it with a few more wipes. If I remember correctly, this should be the armor of the founding king of France. This thing seems to be nothing special except that it is sturdy. And it is said that it was once cursed by goblins. Wearing this thing will give you a terrible apparition. Peter. I secretly wore a helmet when I was a child, and I was so scared that my pants were wet. If you want a new pair of armor, I'll help you find Gilbert for a better pair in the future. William gave her a sideways glance. The dubious Marquis of Gibbard is obviously a scumbag. I have never even heard his name in my last life. As for this armor that is unremarkable in your eyes, it is the eyes of legal players. The little gems in it. This thing can only be obtained by defeating the commander of the horror knights under your command. It is a small elite who has been transferred at least twice. Without the total professional level of LV30, you can't even think about it. Now you can grab it casually, and it's still you don't need to repeatedly brush and drop. One grab is a whole set of work, it's just a lot of money. William fondly wiped the dust off the helmet, took off the archer helmet he bought in the second-hand market, first buttoned the helmet with dim silver glow on it, and then happily replaced all the silver knight suits he just grabbed. Up. One helmet gives 5 points of armor, 2 armors give a total of +4 armor, 2 leg armors give +6 armor, and a breastplate gives +10 armor. The total armor of this equipment is actually as high as 25. Clicking it, although it will not be invulnerable, the ordinary militiaman with pitchforks and sticks will definitely be unstoppable. William, who is full of joy, calls out the status panel and prepares to study the transfer route. Name, William Vankins. Race, human, racial talent cannot be activated. Reputation, French Empire 151/1000, respected. Armor value, 30/30. Special status, the face of a careerist, the appearance of an assassin. Talent, people without boundaries. Special skills, toughness, iron wall ability, riding, beginner, shield use, proficient, heavy swordsmanship, small success, combat skills, silver phantom, cover occupation, guard LV10, full level, civilian LV5, full level, noble. LV5, expired, highest occupation level LV10, total occupation level LV15, physical 40, 5 + 10 + 20 + 5, agility 15, 5 + 10, strength 25, 5 + 10 + 10, will 15, 5 + 10, spirit 15, 5 + 10, the 5-dimensional attribute base is 5 points each, and the guard is a basic occupation with an upper limit of 10 levels. Each level adds 1 point of 5-dimensional attributes. The commoner is a primary occupation with an upper limit of 5 levels. With the 20 points of extra physique given by the profession, his physique is actually approaching the 50 point mark. Equipment: Silver Knight's helmet, Silver Knight's breastplate, Silver Knight's gauntlets, Silver Knight's leg plates, Silver Knight's inner armor, ornate jeweled dagger. Evaluation: no one can kill my teammates in seconds, except for multistage attacks. Okay. William sighed. With 40 points of physique and 30 points of armor, he was just like a plate-armored calf. Unless he retrained a basic profession, he would definitely have to go to the tank. After carefully recalling the career transfer roadmap, the occupations that the guards can transfer are almost the same: épée swordsman, heavy knight, heavy shield guard, heavy swordsman, heavy armor. All of them have a heavy word, and they look at it. On the road of Taihanin, the phase dashed violently. The Silver Knight suit issues a will check to you. It was detected that the will attribute is lower than 50, and the check failed. Unbounded people talent is activated. This check is exempted well. In this cold world, only plugins can give me some comfort. William patted the armor on his body with a smile. The saving throw was cool. I didn't blind my racial talent that couldn't be opened. The unique racial talent of human beings is called reconnaissance aura, and the range of all perception skills is +1. Compared with the spell range of the element dragon family +10, and the long-range attack range of the silver moon elves +10, this talent skill can be said to be quite spicy. However, there is no place to complain. The racial talent and skills are all given by the gods that the race believes in. There are various gods of human origin, so that no can be worshipped by everyone, so they simply protect their own. If you believe in me, then I will protect you. If you don't believe in me, then you will find someone else to take care of you. If you want anyone else, please keep the scumbag talent away, and don't give it away when you go out. As a stowaway and materialist, William took it a step further, not even the most scumbag initial talent. However, he did not gain nothing, instead he obtained a very practical and exclusive talent, the people of the unbounded. The effect of this talent is somewhat similar to that of the royal family of dwarves. The royal family of dwarves has the talent master of equipment, which allows you to use equipment regardless of your needs. The unbounded people ignored all the checks and directly judged to pass. It is easy to understand if you think about it carefully. Since the Hyukao has not fallen into this world, and even a racial skill has not been activated, why should you honestly check the ticket and get on the bus? Tired of escaping tickets all the time? William stroked the armor on his body contentedly, showing a rare affection on his face paralyzed. It's a pity that this joy didn't last long, and it was interrupted by a huge roar. The entire palace suddenly shook violently, some old buildings collapsed one after another, the most sturdy palace main hall also shook twice, and 2 clear cracks appeared on the load-bearing pillars. Earth movement? How could it be? This is a war spell that only 4th Order professionals can master. Avril helped William to stand upright, her charming face was full of astonishment. Could it be that the rebels are calling? Didn't you say there are still 2 days to go? William shook his head, picked up Her Majesty the Queen and ran towards the main hall. It would be nice if the ground motion technique could sway twice. This is not something that the ground motion technique can compare with, but a big boss is about to come out and hit the wall. After a while, a big skeleton will pop up, and raising his hand will send a death curtain to the entire capital. All those who die within 3 days will not float to the Styx, but will be swept away directly by it. You were originally one of them, and it seems that after you were swept away, you were much more mixed up than you are now. In the name of Lady Death, I will take you on a journey beyond the river Styx. A dark cloud of smoke slowly floated into the sky from the center of the capital. The black smoke turned into the face of a skeleton. After grinning at the ground, it was like ink dripping into a water basin. Generally, it quickly drifts around, covering the entire sky in just a few breaths. The Lord of the Undead, Eber, is praying here. May the picture scroll of Lady Death grant the lost soul a silent and eternal sleep. Evil and hoarse prayers rang out in everyone's ears, and those who had not yet escaped from the capital were horrified to discover that countless black, white and grey intertwined souls had emerged from the grave, and then rushed toward the dark, like hundreds of rivers returning to the sea. In the sky. What is this? Avril, who was hiding with William in the main hall of the palace, raised her head in horror, and countless soul swallows rushed to the sky like homing swallows. Above the sky is not a thin layer of black fog, but a sea of dead souls hanging upside down in the sky. The canopy of death. William's voice was still cold. He didn't explain what the sky of death meant. Instead, he honestly looked up at the cutscene CG. This special effect was much cooler than his previous life. Eber. An angry shout sounded, and a big silver hand appeared on the sky, and the quill in his hand swiped like a sword in the sky, covering the pitch-black curtain above the royal capital of Flange. Divided into 2. The gate of the dead country has not yet been opened, yet you dare to block the way of the Styx and cast the sky of death without authorization. Everything in this world will eventually flow to eternal death, so what if I send them away early? The undead monarch's voice was hoarse with a bit of mystery, but also revealed a rebellious arrogance. Ridiculous! What do you have? William has seen this scene many times in his last life, and he can memorize the lines of these two. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com. He listened intently to the negotiations between the two bosses, and said in a low voice in advance, "What if the dead country hasn't opened yet?" So what if the dead country hasn't opened yet? The evil and old voices sounded simultaneously. Without the hoarseness and mystery before, it appeared very arrogant and unrestrained. The dead country is not allowed to come to the Austrian continent before it is opened, so let me push the door of this dead country with my own hands. Ha 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 ha, holding red. The dead country is not allowed to come to the Austrian continent before it is opened, so let me push the door of this dead country with my own hands. Ha 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 ha. The maddened laughter of the undead monarch resounded through the capital, and everyone shivered under the shadow of death. Only the two people hiding in the main hall were unaware. One was watching the CG with full attention, and the other was watching worriedly. The soul that floats to the sky. Whoosh whoosh. A ray of light blue light came from the west, like a tornado across the sky. Wherever it passed, even the clouds were hit and scattered, and the birds blocking the path were even worse. Torn apart. Kill it. An indifferent voice sounded in the sky, and a light blue ray of light smashed into the square in the center of the capital like a meteor. After smashing the statue of the founding king, it sank into the unknown depths of the ground. After a while, countless skeletons with broken limbs poured out from the ground like a fountain, and in a blink of an eye the entire square was covered, and this carpet of skeletons continued to spread outwards, as if it were endless. You witnessed the fall of the Ninth Order Undead King with your own eyes, became a witness to a legend, and obtained some occupational information of the undead sequence and the skeleton sequence. You found the meteorite relic, the Fountain of the Dead. You accepted a gift left by a strong man and gained 5 general attribute points. The majestic undead monarch took the lunch at light speed, and then gave William the long-awaited benefit. The long-awaited William happily opened the attribute panel and added all the wool he picked up to his physique without hesitation, and then began to look at the 2 career trees he just unlocked. Skeleton Guard, Skeleton Attendant, Howling Guard, Death Knife Axe, What the is a Fulgent Blood Giant? Can the guards still be transferred to this ghastly thing? After thinking about it for a while, William couldn't help frowning. None of these occupations seemed suitable. Some require racial checks, such as the Skeleton Guard and the Skeleton Servant. At least a skeleton can be transferred, right? William is able to skip the check and make a hard turn by virtue of his talent, but although the bonuses of these 2 professions are good, they belong to the low-level skeleton-based profession and are naturally commanded by high-level skeletons. What should I do if I encounter the undead who are kidnapped and run away? In one voice. Some have corresponding requirements for using weapons, such as Death Knife Axe. This profession requires the proficiency of the axe to reach at least the proficiency level. The Howling Guards and the like belong to the ghost system of the undead sequence. They have no entity at all. They rely on howling with others. If they turn their 40 points of physique, they will be blinded. As for the Flesh Demon Giant, it's even more nonsense. This class is indeed quite powerful. Although it is only a rank 2 class, it can touch most rank 3 professionals, and even rank 4 professionals will have a headache when they see it. The first meat shield is extremely resistant to beatings. But the problem is even more serious, because it takes 100 physique points to spin this thing. It's just a joke of Nima International. William laughed angrily after reading the job transfer requirement. How many primary jobs have single attributes over 50? The Olefines among the orcs are very talented, but even if the basic occupation is the giant elephant heavy hammer with pure strength growth, it is enough to have more than 80 points of strength. Who can play this broken occupation except the giant clan? Turn? After turning around, William found that only the Nightmare Heavy Cavalry still meets the requirements, and the career prospects are also quite good. The highest level is the Nightmare Lord of the 9th stage. If you can take this road, you don't have to worry about turning until LV90. Job. But this profession requires at least one childhood nightmare as a mount. The undead monarch hasn't pushed open the door of the dead country. Now it doesn't even count as a crack in the door. Knowing when to sneak through a nightmare, let alone catch one. After searching for a long time, he couldn't find a suitable career change direction. William had no choice but to close the panel angrily, and began to figure out what to do next. As a foresight stowaways, although I lost the privilege of upgrading Krypton Gold, I still know the approximate timeline. He originally planned to fill up the level of the basic occupation in Flange, and then pick up the wool of the Undead King, and get a stronger second-rank occupation. After all, the commander of the Palace Guards is also a rank 3 professional with a spicy chicken profession. If there is a strong rank 2 profession, you can get along well in any faction, and at least it is no problem to get a baron position. Although Her Majesty the Queen is fragrant, her wish is obviously unfulfilled. She must be saved if she can, but it is absolutely possible to accompany her all the way to the dark. The southern wall of this world is too hard and thick. 1,000 iron heads can't be broken. However, William was too partial to the law system in his previous life, and he was also cultivating high-level occupations in the later stage. He was really unfamiliar with the first few turns of the guards. He didn't expect that the undead class transfer route was not suitable at all. This time, it will be a bit troublesome. Although the first and second tiers sound similar, they are the same as the difference between a baron and a knight. Once you have crossed it, you are a hereditary fief and aristocratic class. No matter how many manors you have crossed it, you are still a commoner. Survival is definitely not a problem, but the natural disaster of the dead is about to start. If there is no territory and private army, isn't it still a cannon fodder's life? Just as he was thinking about a way out, Avril on the side pulled his armor with a dignified expression. William, there is no way to defend the capital. We must gather the defenders of the capital as soon as possible. No. Such a big movement cannot be concealed. There must be scouts from the rebels near the capital, and they will definitely dispatch the speed as soon as possible. The fastest light cavalry to inquire about the news. We don't want infantry, just knights, and the royal capital knights can take as much as they can. Hearing this, William couldn't help but hesitate for a moment. Although those rebels didn't make much of a difference in the original history, he was no longer a kryptonite in his previous life. Wouldn't it be too dangerous to continue to follow the Queen to restore the country? He quietly opened the task panel and took a look. Mission 1. Destroy the Knights of the Royal Capital or break up their establishment 275/1000 Mission 2, kill Peter King of France 0/1 Mission 3, completely destroy Flange, or let the 7 Grand Duchies of Flange no longer recognize the status of the royal family of Flange 6/7. After a while, there were hundreds of people and a Grand Duke. Now that I'm on the Queen's ship, I always feel like I entered the palace as in 1912. William, what are you looking at? Seeing William standing motionless, just staring at herself, panel, through the visor, Avril looked down and found that her clothes were a little messy and her neckline was also a little messy because she was carried by William before. It opened a little, and there was a white greasy on the chest. Avril felt a little feverish on her face. She covered her neckline with a light anger, grabbed William, and ran outside the palace. What am I thinking? I'm wondering if I should throw you away and run away. You're thinking about something messed up. William picked up his sword and followed decisively. At this time, the people in the palace were already running around, and the two of them led 2 ponies in the stable and hurried to the residence of the Royal Capital Knights. The 2 ran wildly on horseback, and soon arrived at the station of the knights. There was no one in front of the station. The guards who were usually responsible for guarding the door ran away. Avril rushed in first and knocked on the door. Aggregated wall clock. Dang 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 dang. After a series of rapid bells rang, nearly 100 figures in full body armor came out one after another from the houses in the station, stepped on the horses and came to the school grounds in the station, and slowly followed the training in the past array. William looked at it coldly and found that not everyone was a jerk. The knights were already considered as a reserved class of nobles. Strictly speaking, they were considered to be small landlords with well-off families. They provided their own armor, weapons, and horses during the war. These people's physical fitness is quite good, but the formation is indeed very unfamiliar, and 80% of the leaders of the Royal Knights have not trained them well. In Avril's point of view, the training of these knights is barely passable, and there may be other reasons for the slow formation. Many people obviously deliberately vacated the adjacent positions, and they slowly filled it up after seeing that no one came out. It is obvious that many people have already run away. Looking at the array that was vacant by more than 70%, she was so angry that she coughed again. Most of the knights of the royal capital are elites selected by the Marquis of Gibbard himself. Although they have only been responsible for guarding the royal capital in recent years, they have been neglected in training, but at least 40% of them are professionals. The number of practitioners is not even 20%, and the number of second-order professionals is even less than 10. Ahem. Where's your chief? There are 1,000 people in the royal capital knights, why are there only these people now? The knights in the school field looked at each other, and an older knight came out. He had a non-commissioned officer's epaulet on his shoulder, and he should be a second-tier professional. I saw him making a knightly salute with his right fist hammering his chest, and his face full of beards flushed red. Your Majesty, after Chief Abel reported the battle to you, he returned with several hundred brothers, saying yes, that the capital could no longer be held, and saying. Avril's face was flushed with anger, and blue veins appeared on her fair neck. She clenched her silver teeth and asked, what else did he say? He said that you are, His Majesty the King is ready to run. If you don't run, you will be captured by the rebels sooner or later, Avril clenched her fists tightly, took a few deep breaths to calm down, waved her hand to signal the bearded knight to step back, then stepped forward and gritted her teeth. Very good, you can stay here. Reading www.uuganshu.com proves your loyalty. But what Abel said is true, the capital can no longer be held. However, several Grand Dukes are still there, and the 7th French 5 of the Grand Duchess also recognized the rule of the royal family. William sighed quietly, Sister, although you don't know it, I do know that there is only one Grand Duke left to support you, and 80% of it is the Grand Duke of the North who is fighting the barbarians in the north. After all, you have been out for so many years. The supplies came out again to help him resist the barbarian invasion, but he was fighting like a raging fire, obviously he couldn't let go. The Marquis of Gibe, who is guarding the Holy Empire in the south, is leading his army back. He leads 100,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 knights. We just need to go south and we will meet him in about 3 days. Go the rebels. Giber does have a large number of troops that can be dispatched, but the premise is that the royal family of France is still sitting on the throne. When the news of the capital being captured, those troops composed of small nobles will be split into pieces in an instant. So now, how many people are willing to leave the capital with me? Avril looked around, and nearly 200 of the less than 300 knights in the audience raised their hands. Those who don't have siblings in the family put their hands down. Although we will definitely be able to drive away the rebels, this road is doomed to be dangerous. If you die on the road, your parents will be left unsupported, and Flange will be in chaos. To take you is to kill them. The 20 or so knights put their hands down in shame, not daring to look up at the surrounding comrades. The family members in the capital and the rebel-occupied areas also put their hands down. I believe in your loyalty, so I can't let you and your family see each other. This time, more than 50 people put down their hands, and there were only over 100 people who still raised their hands. William's heart was half cold. Avril didn't know that there was something wrong with her guard's mentality. She looked around at the knights in the school field. Except for the bearded one, the other knights looked very young. The oldest was not even 30 years old. More 17 or 18-year-olds were all about the same age as William. She glanced back at William Shang's childish face, then turned around a little unbearably, and sighed in front of all the knights. Also, if you really want to go south with me, you must be prepared to take risks. After the fall of the capital, the Marquis of Gibbert's control of the troops will definitely go wrong. Although several Grand Dukes did not oppose the royal family, but you may not necessarily send reinforcements, you must consider whether you want to go with me or not. William's heart suddenly became cold, and he was still soft-hearted. This time with you, his future is completely hopeless. This is equivalent to interviewing a startup company. After talking about the ambitions of the Fortune 500, the boss tells you that the company's sales channels have just been pried, and the only investor is considering withdrawing capital, asking if you are still willing to join. Even if you think she's an honest and good person, you probably won't be willing to join the job. After all, everyone is an ordinary person, and you have to consider the food, rice, oil, salt, and rice, not to mention that she still ties her head to her waist and sacrifices her life for others. Sure enough, as he expected, this time Crash Lala put down nearly 100 hands, but many people who had already put down their hands before raised their hands again. Most of the people who raised their hands again were young people, their expressions were very excited, and there were inexplicable expressions in their eyes. William is very familiar with this look. This look is common among die-hard fans of various night novels, and it is a symptom of patients with advanced secondary cancer. Avril took a brief count and found that there were about 30 people left who were willing to go with her. Among them, only 3 were professionals, and there was only one second-order professional with a beard. She sighed, and even thought about whether she would just run away with William, and the Queen would be inappropriate, let alone helping Marquis Gilbert to stabilize the situation. It was hard to say whether she could get rid of the rebels' pursuit. William, from now on, you and a knight with a thick beard will be in charge of the Royal Capital Knights. In addition, the guards around me have either been scattered or have already run away, so don't serve me as a guard anymore. Now, let's be a knight from now on. Accepted the canonization of a member of the royal family, you have obtained information about the basic occupation. Knight meet the requirements of this occupation. Successful inauguration. The highest level of the current occupation is LV10, and the total occupation level is LV16. Knight LV1 physical +1, strength +1, agility +1 per level. Special skill, armor mastery, all armor from equipment increases by 10%. Special skill, glory barrier, if the armor value completely cancels an attack, the attacker will be knocked back. Combat skill, charge, launch a charge forward, the damage caused by the next attack increases with the charge distance, and the maximum damage can be doubled. Suddenly being given a new career, William was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly realized. The normal path for a knight's career is first join a knight order, receive training in martial arts and physical fitness, swear allegiance to XX after reaching the training standard, become a knight after being canonized. The training of martial arts and physical fitness adds nothing more than abilities and attributes. The skills required by an inaugural knight are riding and swordsmanship. William has no problem with these two. The entry-level riding skills are passable, and Xiao Keng's swordsmanship can even be said to be quite good. As for attributes, when he was forced to become a bodyguard, he had undergone 2 years of hard training, and now he has reached the full level of LV10. The attributes must meet the needs of a knight's inauguration. Then allegiance and canonization are no problem. Although Flan has taken a pill, it is not over yet. It is still an empire in name. Avril's queen status can still be recognized, and of course she is qualified to be canonized as a knight. Avril took out a long sword from the weapon rack next to the school grounds, drew the sword with a serious expression, and put it on William's shoulder. In the name of the Queen of the French Empire, I canonize Mr. William Vankins as the Deputy Commander of the Royal Capital Knights, effective immediately." William looked at the sharp sword with a cold light around his neck, and wanted to shout, "That's it!" The canonizer didn't say the prayer, the knight commander who was canonized didn't kneel on one knee, and he didn't even read a statement. "You just made me an official just by making a casual gesture? For the first time, I have command of a unit," and the Legion panel opens. William, who received the prompt from the system, smacked his dry lips. "Okay. The system recognizes it, it's okay if there is no sense of ritual. Legion name, Royal Capital Knights, pseudo, Legion level, First Class Corporation Establishment, 32/1000 Legion features, crash, causing higher damage to low-speed targets. The lower the target enemy's speed, the higher the damage. Legion skill, Swarm Dash, all members sprint forward, increase movement speed and increase damage. How miserable. Even the name was given a pseudo name, and even the identity class Knight Commander was not given. The panel of this Knight Order is even worse than some of the initial regiment's level 0 militia assigned by default. If nothing else, there are still 100 people in a full Tier 0 militia, and there are only 30 people in this tier of knights. What are they enough for? The two football games were not together. Tuco returns to Tuco, but this is all cavalry after all, and there are 3 professionals, which is not bad. After all, it is a legion who came for free. My titular boss, why does this person look familiar? William glanced at the bearded man. At this time, he was excitedly accepting Avril's canonization. He looked like a warm-blood middle-aged man. Unfortunately, the beard on his face was too thick. William even suspected that the beard had grown. It has to be attached to the chest hair. Your will, my long sword. The bearded body was shaking like a sieve. He knelt down on one knee and clenched a fist with his right hand and hammered it in his heart. The beard on his face was like a hedgehog lying on his mouth, and this hedgehog was repeatedly squatting. Jump, keep opening and closing. Glory is my life, justice is truth. The will of a knight is an unsheathed sword in the face of a strong enemy. I will gladly face it. Death is not a catastrophe for me, but a way back. The scar on the chest is the best medal. May my grave have a broken sword instead of a tombstone. I will always follow your will and swing my sword. The oath of hundreds of words was written in one go without any stammer in the middle. It was obvious that he had memorized it by heart, and he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. While the bearded reciting poetry, William took a peek at the knights in the school field. Those who did not choose to join were mostly ashamed, while those who had joined stared at the bearded man on stage with admiration. Each with their heads held high and their eyes shining, with a proud look. Witnessing an excellent canonization ceremony, the Legion was granted a temporary special state, which lasted until the end of the next battle. Special state, chivalry. This is a group of determined knights who can launch an effective charge in the face of enemies far superior to themselves. In the face of an enemy who is far superior to oneself, isn't this the top? How can a knight be responsible for attacking the fortress? The cost of this type of arms is so expensive, who would be willing to face it? Large-scale knight hedges on the battlefield are all. Isn't it fragrant that the plot in Knight's novels is surrounded and interspersed with high power? Bullying infantry is the kingly use of this unit. Seeing the majestic expressions of a group of young people, William sighed to himself, and he was a little bit weaker about the prospects of this knight order. On the rugged mountain road, it was raining heavily, and a group of grey-faced young people led their horses to walk on the mountain path with difficulty. The leader is a woman with peach blossom eyes and a small 3-faced face. It is Her Majesty the Queen of Flange. These people who are struggling to move forward are the Royal Knights, pseudo, who have just left the capital. We are all cavalry, why do we still have to take the mountain road? This is probably the hardest road I've ever walked in my life. Even though the buff of chivalry is still there, this mountain road is too difficult to walk, and these young people with the dream of knighthood can't help but complain a few words. The mountain road in the rain has a mud puddle at one foot, and it is extremely exhausting to walk, not to mention having to lead a horse. Occasionally the horse's hooves would get stuck in the mud. Fortunately, these people have been trained as knights. Even if they are not professionals, their strength is far greater than that of ordinary people. The two of them can work together to drag the horse out of the mud. Otherwise, there is no way to be here. Hurry in the weather. After dragging the mount out of the mud for the third time, seeing his beloved horse turn into a mud horse, the bearded man grinned in distress. He hesitated and said to William, "Cousin, can you ask Her Majesty the Queen how long we have to go on the mountain road? My horse has fallen and sunk several times." "That's right, this bearded man has the same surname as William Vankins. He is William's distant cousin. As for why he is not a cousin, this second-order professional with a full face is actually 17 years old, can you believe it?" Out of some kind of bad taste, William directly recognized this guy who was a year older than him as his cousin. "Since you were my deputy in the position, it would be a good idea to take advantage of the relatives and come back." He stretched out his hand and patted his bearded cousin on the shoulder. Even though the sky was raining heavily and the mountain road under his feet was muddy, his voice still did not tremble, and it sounded as cold and hard as ice. "Cousin. Hey, cousin, I'm listening. Are you really only 17? The bearded man pursed his mouth, and the black hedgehog lying on his mouth squirmed twice, as if he was muttering something. He shook off the muddy water on his beard and complained with some dissatisfaction, "Cousin, I didn't lie to you, I just celebrated my 17th birthday last month, and I just matured a little. And cousin, please don't interrupt, everyone is very dangerous now, how about us? Professionals are okay, those reserve knights are exhausted, what if they encounter an enemy?" William wiped off the mud that had been splashed on the silver armor without changing his face. Instead of answering his cousin's question, he asked quietly, "You're a Tier 2 Iron Wall Knight, right? I remember that this profession has 2 large shields. Why haven't I seen your shield?" "Hey? Yes, don't look at me at the age of 17, but I am a recognized genius, and I may be able to reach the 3rd rank in 2 years. As for my shield, that thing can't be brought. A shield is better than a horse. It's still going to sink, and I usually have to be dragged by the logistical monsters to bring it. By the way, cousin, why are you asking this? I was just thinking about what to do when I encounter an enemy. Now I know. If I encounter an enemy, I can just ride a horse and run with Her Majesty the Queen in my arms." The bearded man looked puzzled. "Cousin, you are crazy, how do you ride a horse on this mountain road?" William's expression remained indifferent. "Isn't there still you? You don't have a shield anyway, so why don't you run with our horse on your back?" Hans Vankins felt a little hopeless. When Her Majesty the Queen rushed into the station, he recognized William behind Her Majesty at a glance. He was also present when the Vankins family was banned, and was very impressed by the cousin who brazenly attacked the Queen. After being sent to the Knights of the royal capital, he paid special attention to the news of William's cousin, and even went to the gate of the palace to see William who was in charge of the gate. This cousin looks like an ordinary face paralyzed, and even the dead face looks a little kinder after seeing it too much, which makes people want to chat with him all the time. But the more Hans looked, the more he felt that William's face was not right. Although there was never an expression on it, he always felt that there were piles of bad water hidden behind him. Hans trusted his intuition very much. When he was 10 years old, his mother touched his head and said earnestly, "Hans, you can let a 4-year-old kid steal the meal money, I think you should stop thinking about it. If you encounter something you don't understand, then rely on intuition or just toss a coin." Hans was pleased with this sentence and regarded it as a standard. But now, his intuition tells him that cousin William is definitely not a simple person. The act of beating the Queen's sap looks stupid, but isn't my cousin living a good life now? Instead, the clansmen who laugh at him are impoverished. I have a pretty good life. Not only do I get help from the clan, but also the salary of the knights, but after deducting the money for the maintenance of horses and weapons, life is still very tight. But cousin William only needs to stand at the gate of the palace occasionally, but his salary is much higher than his own, and not only is he rich, but also has a lot of time to go to the theater and dance. Quite popular in the circle. Mom said that to see if a person is smart or not, it is not what he does, but what he gets in the end. So, on the one hand, you are so poor that you can hardly eat, and on the other hand, you live a very nourishing life. Who is the smart person? Later, William was transferred to the Queen's side as a bodyguard. He had been fighting for the past 2 years. Her Majesty the Queen, who personally commanded the battle, often stayed on the front line, and the death and casualty rate of the guards around him was extremely high. Everyone thought that cousin William would be carried back like those people sooner or later, but Hans didn't think so. Sure enough, after dozens of wars, both big and small, over the past 2 years, the guards around Her Majesty the Queen have been killed and wounded, but cousin William has always been alive and kicking. Carrying him everywhere is better than his own younger brother. He is envious of Hans, who has been guarding the house, guard, in the capital. Intuition tells him that following this cousin, I will do whatever he does, and there will definitely be meat to eat. Soon, the opportunity to eat meat will come. When the rebels were about to hit the capital, the colleagues around him ran away by 30%. He felt that it was a little early to run now, so he did not follow. Then, a big earthquake collapsed his bedroom, and a grotesque monster attacked the capital. The rest of his colleagues ran for more than half of them. He originally wanted to run with him, but he had several years of savings in the dormitory. If he ran now, the years would be wasted. Just when he was digging hard, Her Majesty the Queen actually came with his cousin. Cousin William was not only still alive, but also changed into expensive-looking armor, feeling more nourished than before. Hans was so overjoyed that he intuitively told him to follow this cousin. Why did it suddenly feel like it would be miserable to follow him? When Her Majesty the Queen was giving a speech, Hans quietly took out the coin left by his mother and tossed it. He followed his cousin on the heads, and ran by himself on the tails. The coin was heads. Hans, who had given up thinking, resolutely boarded the pirate ship, brought enough dry food for a week, and followed his cousin and Her Majesty the Queen out of the royal city. Unexpectedly, it rained heavily as soon as we left the city. Originally everyone was walking well on the road, but Her Majesty the Queen ordered them to lead a group of cavalry on the mountain road. Let the cavalry walk the mountain road, isn't this sick? Hans thought about it and couldn't figure out what it was for, but the smart cousin didn't say a word, so he must trust smart people. It's just that this mountain road is too difficult to walk. My little white horse has been stuck in the mud several times. Every step is very difficult, and even the belly under which the rain can't be poured is sweaty. Hans is not afraid of getting tired, but he really loves his horse, which is the horse given by the Marquise of Gibbert. This breed of horse is very precious. The bearded cousin became more and more aggrieved the more he thought about it. He pursed his lips with an aggrieved expression. His face, which looked like he was almost 40 years old, was about to cry, as if he was about to cry in the next second. Seeing that his cheap cousin was being molested, his mentality collapsed, and William had to turn around to make up for his sloppy mouth, and he rarely became serious. Cousin, although we only have more than 30 people, we are all heavily armored cavalrymen. The movement when we left the city was not small. It was impossible to hide the fact that Her Majesty the Queen had left the king. Moreover, our movements were too easy to guess. We'll inevitably go all the way to the south to join the Marquis of Gib. The troops of the Marquis of Gibbert may not all agree with him. There must be people who support the rebels. Maybe these people are preparing to besiege us. Now there are a large number of rebel scouts around the capital. These Epperson light cavalry are not a threat, but our speed is not as fast as the rebels' messenger monsters. If the whereabouts are exposed, we may not be greeted by reinforcements but an ambush. And the rebel army has not yet arrived, the scouts sent must be the fastest light cavalry, the only place they will not appear is in the mountains, and there are many rugged mountain roads, we can only ensure that we will not be caught by the rebels the scout found. The bearded man nodded again and again. Although he didn't understand much, it seemed that he really should take the mountain road. As for the others who noticed the conversation between the two, they were full of admiration and looked at Avril in front of the team, who was trudging through the mud. Her Majesty the Queen is really amazing. I thought about it so much yet, no wonder I haven't lost a battle in the past 2 years. Following Her Majesty the Queen, we will definitely be able to fight back to the capital, and then we will all be great knights. Human beings feel confused when they feel that what they do is meaningless, but if they find that they are on the 5th floor and the enemy is still wandering on the 1st floor, their inner sense of accomplishment will instantly burst. The rookie knights who had reached the 5th floor at such a young age were beaming with joy, their waists and legs were no longer sore, and they were able to pull their horses out of the mud puddle. At the front of the team, Avril, who was in the mud with 1 foot deep and 1 shallow foot, raised her lips slightly, and turned her head to give William an approving look. I didn't expect this little guy to have some commanding talent. As his bodyguard, he has listened to a lot of military discussions in the past 2 years. If the rebellion wasn't too sudden, he should be an officer who can stand on his own by now. Avril's look made William tremble. Her Majesty the Queen is usually dignified and dignified. Even though she has a coquettish face, she has a majestic sense of majesty to set off. No one will think she is too charming. However, it is raining heavily now, and all manners have been washed away, and all the hair on the head is wet against the face, and Her Majesty's scumbag face, against the wet hair, looks even more astringent. Now, the 2 soul-seeking peach blossom eyes glanced back, not to mention being too sultry. However, William was at a young age, and his peers might prefer young and invincible girls, and he could still have some resistance. But William lives in Old Skye, and Her Majesty the Queen really hits his bullseye. The charming look in his eyes made him stumble under his feet, and he almost planted his horse and his horse into the grove beside the road. Avril Ferrer launched a charm to you. It was detected that the wool attribute is lower than 20, and the check failed. Unbounded people talent is activated, this check is exempted. It's too scary. I almost fell down with a look. Fortunately, I still have the talent for saving throws, otherwise I'd be embarrassed this time. Just when William was glad he was surviving the catastrophe, his body suddenly froze, and a blazing white light spilled out of his body. Under the shocked gaze of his bearded cousin, Avril, who was walking in front, was blasted out. Unpredictable, the unfortunate Her Majesty the Queen was blasted into the air more than 2 meters away, slammed into the big tree by the roadside, and then slid down softly and didn't move. This white light is exactly the knight's stunt barrier of glory. It is a very useful passive skill. If the armor value completely cancels an attack, it will emit a white light to knock the attacker back, but... Fuck! Can a glance count as an attack? William quickly let go of the reins, stumbled over and sniffed Avril's breath, and then let out a breath. Her Majesty the Queen was still alive, but she just passed out when her head hit a tree. He reached out and patted Avril's cheek, and tried pinching her again, but it didn't work. Her Majesty the Queen was still lying on the ground, motionless, but her chest was still rising and falling regularly, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Question. At this time, William noticed that there was an abnormal blush on her cheek, and when he patted her face, the temperature felt a little high. Thinking of her previous coughs one after another, Her Majesty doesn't have a fever, right? He casually touched Avril's forehead, and then calmly waved to the bearded man behind him. Cousin. The bearded man walked over with a strange expression and responded hesitantly. Cousin, are you too calm? You just knocked Her Majesty the Queen away by more than 2 meters, without even blinking an eyelid? Your Majesty. The fever passed out, you asked them to help us lead our horses, I'll go with Her Majesty on my back first. In addition, we need to find a place to hide from the rain as soon as possible. You send 2 people to see if there is any nearby the cave of the beast." Bearded Hans twitched the corners of his mouth and gained a new understanding of his cousin's calmness. If he hadn't seen him blow the queen away, he might have been fooled by him. "But this has nothing to do with me. I am willing to follow him and leave the capital because I believe that my cousin is a smart person. When I don't know what to do, it is definitely better to follow the smart person than to rush around." Bearded with a complicated expression, he arranged for the rookie knights to find a place to shelter from the rain, and he hesitantly approached. "Cousin, what are you doing to knock out Her Majesty the Queen? Do you want to delay for a few days and don't want to join up with Marquis Gilbert immediately?" William's mouth twitched, and he said calmly, "No." "Then you are not optimistic that Her Majesty the Queen can fight back? Are you going to capture her and hand it over to the rebels to change her title? Nor is it then what are you trying to do? Do you have people in the rebel army? You know that the enemy's scouts are coming and it's hard to explain, and you want to find an excuse to take everyone to hide. Where did you get so many conspiracy theories?" William really doesn't know how to explain it. Could it be that he was almost knocked down by Her Majesty the Queen at a glance? Unable to explain, William had to keep his face straight, trying hard to maintain his facial paralysis, and said lightly, "Don't think about it, it's just an accident." The bearded man smiled honestly, obviously not believing a word. "Mom once said that smart people do things for a reason, even if they don't understand it now. You will see why he does it in a few days and see what he got. Since my cousin doesn't want to talk now, it's fine. Although my brain is not good, I can think about it. If I can't figure it out, I don't want to. Anyway, I will know sooner or later." "Deputy Commander. There seems to be a cave in front of you, and there should be 2 bears in it. Her Majesty the Queen can go there to take shelter from the rain." William nodded, the corners of his mouth raised slightly on his indifferent face, and a smile of approval appeared. "Good job, lead the way. The Knights of the Royal Capital, Pseudo, here are forming a group to bully the Bear family, and the rebels there have just received the news that the capital has changed." A nobleman in his 30s listened to his subordinate's report with a solemn look on his face. "You said that the capital is suspected to be attacked by a Ninth Order professional? The true has not come for thousands of years, and the Ninth Order professional is a living god. It is impossible for such a strong man to destroy a city. There are survivors. How did the spy in the palace live to spread the news?"